Good morning, everyone. Gefel, did you have a logistics announcement to start with, or should I dive right in here? Okay, all right. Ladies and gentlemen, one of my greatest honors as a member of Parliament has been to spend time with new Canadians. Many people who come to Canada do so because of political repression or instability in their country of origin. They come here seeking freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. The right to express their opinions whenever they want and without fear of repression or violence. The right to be recognized as equal citizens regardless of their faith or identity. The freedom to be both true to their convictions and loyal to their new country. However, in my conversations with a growing number of communities, new Canadians are raising the alarm about the growing efforts of foreign states to reach into the lives of new Canadians here on Canadian soil, to monitor and threaten them, and to pressure them into lending support to the strategic agenda of the foreign state, or at least to try to get them to stop speaking out for justice and human rights. This can involve threats to family members still back in their country of origin, and also direct threats of violence here in Canada. This phenomenon does not just impact new Canadians. Efforts to monitor and intimidate Canadians, capture elites, and prevent the free exchange of ideas here in Canada undermine the exercise of our basic rights and freedoms. Canadians have fought and died for these rights. We must make sure that these rights are not eaten away by foreign agents operating in dark alleys. Canada must remain the kind of society where all people, regardless of their views or their country of origin, are free to express their opinions, where the repression and violence that newcomers may have once experienced from their governments elsewhere is not able to continue to hold them back even once they have arrived in Canada. Groups like Amnesty International have documented the interference and intimidation that targets Canadian citizens and others right here on Canadian soil, and also the challenges that Canadians facing intimidation can experience when trying to access support. If a Canadian faces foreign-backed threats and intimidation, who do they go to? Many have reported getting the runaround. The Foreign Affairs Minister has recently told Canadians in this situation to simply call their local police. But this is not merely a police matter. This is a national security matter. The intentional, coordinated, strategic exercise of power by foreign states here in Canada is not something that local police departments are ideally placed to respond to alone. Instead, the Government of Canada must lead, working with law enforcement agencies, other levels of government, and civil society to identify and root out this kind of intimidation and violence. Conservatives under Erin O'Toole have been clear about the risks presented by the Chinese government, but also other foreign states who are seeking to interfere in Canada. We have already passed a motion in the House of Commons opposed by the government, calling on the government to put in place a clear plan to address this issue. Today I am announcing a private member's motion, M55, which will stand in my name and be seconded by Mr. Paul-Hus. It builds on our Opposition Day motion, reaffirming its importance, but also specifically calling on the federal government to work with provincial, territorial, and municipal leaders to help them combat foreign state interference in their areas of jurisdiction. Given some of the issues that we've seen on university campuses in particular, that cross-jurisdictional cooperation is vital. And most importantly, this motion will call on the federal government to put in place new measures to support Canadians who are victims of foreign state interference. Canada must live up to its commitment to be the true north, strong and free from foreign interference, strong and free for all who live here. I'm now going to hand things over to Mr. Paul-Hus, who will say a few words in French, and then you will have an opportunity to hear directly from people who have been victims of foreign state interference. And after that, we'll take your questions.
Merci Garnett. Bonjour tout le monde. Donc, je suis ici aujourd'hui pour appuyer mon collègue Garnett Genuis pour le dépôt de la motion. Une motion qui vise à parler de la menace sérieuse pour le Canada et pour les Canadiens concernant la sécurité des citoyens, la sécurité des infrastructures essentielles et la préservation de l'intégrité des institutions canadiennes. La technologie évolue à un rythme rapide et les menaces étrangères augmentent. Le gouvernement canadien doit faire davantage pour protéger la souveraineté de notre pays et la sécurité de nos citoyens. Et comme vous le savez, il y a bon nombre de rapports faisant état de menaces contre des citoyens canadiens nés à l'étranger, et ce n'est que la pointe de l'iceberg. Le Canada doit intensifier ses efforts afin de se protéger des mauvais acteurs étatiques étrangers. Qu'il s'agisse de menaces pour les Canadiens, que j'ai déjà mentionnées, d'investissements étrangers dans nos industries, nos institutions de recherche et notre réseau 5G, ce gouvernement doit prendre l'action dès maintenant. En effet, certains de nos alliés hésitent à partager de l'information avec le Canada car il y a une perte de confiance. Et ça, c'est totalement inacceptable. Aujourd'hui, nous accueillons 4 personnes qui vont témoigner sur l'influence étrangère qu'ils ont vécue ici, chez nous, au Canada. Si le gouvernement Trudeau pouvait enfin se décider à accepter les faits, accepter ce qu'on voit dans les différents rapports de sécurité, dont le rapport sur la sécurité, le rapport des parlementaires sur la sécurité, qui confirme ce qui se passe chez nous au Canada, ce serait déjà un premier pas important. Donc, j'appuie sans réserve la motion de mon ami Garnett et j'ai hâte d'entendre les témoignages qu'on va avoir aujourd'hui. Merci.
Tishtale and hello everyone. My name is Chimi Lamo and I'm a student at the University of Toronto Scarborough. It's no doubt that the Chinese government ruthlessly tries to crush all dissent and now are on a global mission to silence any criticism of their policies and their brutal human rights record at large, even in a free and open society like Canada. Being a Tibetan Buddhist, we're taught of values like empathy and compassion, the ability to put yourself in other people's shoes. So I encourage everyone listening today to imagine being a stateless refugee because of the illegal occupation of your country, having to move several countries to find a safe home for your kids. This is the case for many Canadians, including my parents. In February 2019, despite years of activism and advocacy work that I've been involved in the student world, I became the target of most likely crafted by the Chinese government when I ran for student elections at the University of Toronto Scarborough. Before the results had even come out, my phone started going off with notifications with over 16,000 comments on my social media posts. I was targeted because of my Tibetan identity. The comments I received were harsh. They included rape threats, death threats, not just against me, but my whole family. Comments like, "The bullet that will go through you is made in China. If I see you, I'll punch you." And there was even one that read, "Your mom is dead." I recall having to call my mother to check in on her without frightening her. Throughout my presidential term, I continued to receive occasional threats, dehumanizing, degrading comments additional to students on my campus, following me, staring, taking photos of people that I talked to. This experience is very personal to me, but in regards to the Tibetan community and many other human rights activists here in Canada, it's not new news. It's something that we've been facing for a long time. We call it the tentacles of the Chinese government. Today, universities are still present with very strong ties to Confucius Institutes, where students are being bullied for taking up space, talking about human rights abuse in Tibet, East Turkestan, Hong Kong, Taiwan. Canadian universities are censoring themselves and their students within the academic spaces because of the influence and power that the Chinese government has within their university. Even anonymous Chinese students have written to their student unions saying that they're terrified by the presence of organizations like CISA who are reporting campus activities to the Chinese government. I support the motion tabled by MP Genuis today because no student, no Canadian on Canadian soil who wishes to serve their community should have to check if they're being followed. No leader should have to see active groups on their campus self-censoring themselves because they're scared of going through what I had to go through. No Canadian should have to worry about their child being punched, raped, or killed for standing up for something that they care about. My immigrant parents did not overcome so many obstacles, started over and over again for me to be bullied here. To the Chinese government, your long-arm bullying tactics won't work here. And to you folks listening today, we need you to see the same and make a stand, because your silence is also a stand. And to the government, please listen to the Canadians. Concrete actions such as 1, implementing legislation to counter covert Chinese government interferences similar to US and Australia. 2, pursue independent public investigations into harassment, intimidation, as well as the instrumentalization of international students. 3, developing a centralized focal point within the government to go to for support would be a good start. And you can also refer to page 51 of the harassment and intimidation report that Amnesty had sent you in March 2020 report. Thank you.
So we'll go on to the next speaker, please.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Rukia Turdush. I'm a Uyghur human rights activist. Today, I would like to talk about China's influence in Canada and how they're intimidating to Uyghur community. In February 11, 2019, I realized deeply that Chinese Communist Party's control not only limited to East Turkestan, my previous country that colonized by China, it was extended to everywhere. They even trying to control our Canadian democratic value, the speech freedom in our academic field. On that day, I was invited by McMaster University Muslim Student Associations to give speech about ongoing genocide in East Turkestan. During my speech, a few Chinese students tried to disturb me, and one of them filmed the whole presentation and actually verbally assaulted me with foul language during the discussion period. Next day, I received from someone leaked screenshot evidences of those Chinese students' WeChat group app communications. In posts on the app, they have discussed how to disturb my speech and to send a recorded video to the Chinese consulate. Someone in the group, could be the Chinese diplomat, was upset why there are only 5 Chinese students participate the event, despite the Chinese students in McMaster University was informed about the speech in advance. Another message in that post said, find everything about her son, so they can look for my son to threaten me. McMaster Chinese Student Associations and the Chinese academics published joint statement on February 13. The language of the statement exactly echoes the language of the Chinese Communist Party's false propaganda line on what is happening in East Turkestan. Statement also mentioned that they have reported the incident to the Chinese consulate and sent compliant letter to the school administration. Later, the Embassy of China in Ottawa published a statement praising the so-called patriotism of those students who attacked my Canadian right to freedom of speech. In fact, my speech was about China's incarceration of several million Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims for concentration camps. It's about China's removal of more than 500,000 Uyghur children to so-called orphanage camps for Sinicization. It is about China's policy and the genocidal actions of slavery labor and the forced sterilization against Uyghur women. All of these concrete planned actions against the people of East Turkestan reveals China's genocidal intention and action, since it was repeatedly implemented despite the well-known devastating result. Those Chinese students who defend China's crime of genocide under the name of patriotism either brainwashed and work under the direct guidance of United Front of China, or blindly loyalists to fascist form of Chinese nationalism. China's covert agents are not only opposes academic freedom and the freedom of speech, but also aims to bully Uyghur family members who criticize China or citizens of Canada. Uyghur family members and back home are taken hostage by the Chinese government, and many Uyghur Canadians are threatened by the Chinese police and forced to stay away from Uyghur community in Canada or forced to work for the CCP as an informant. What is clear is that Chinese Communist Party has encouraged a large number of Chinese students that study in the West export their lies about the Chinese atrocities, actively try to undermine Canadian democracy, Canadian value, and speech freedom in Canadian soil. It is important for Canadian government to take strong measurement and actions against the Chinese influence, because it is about the sovereignty of Canada and it's about the security of Canadian citizens. It's also about to protect our democratic value. Canadian government should create counter China's interference office and train investigators to discover, expose, monitor, and knock down the interference. Thank you.
Thank you, Garnett and Pierre, for organizing and hosting this press conference. I'm very happy to see that you're taking the threat of foreign influence in Canada so seriously. The Chinese government is indeed not the only foreign government that engages in malign influence and information warfare operations in Canada. The Kremlin is engaging in similar tactics. I know because in addition to tracking them, I've also been directly affected by them. My role as a leader of the Canadian and international campaigns for Magnitsky human rights sanctions legislation has attracted the attention of pro-Kremlin trolls over the past decade. In the best cases, harassment and threatening comments are intended to physically wear down activists. They seek to delegitimize critics and marginalize us. This is an ongoing problem, but one that can be overcome by actively promoting and supporting resilience against them. For instance, in early 2019, after publishing a report exposing Russian government influence operations in Canada, I was subjected to an organized campaign to discredit me, undertaken by some former diplomats and academics with interests in Russia and ties to Russian-linked organizations. Thankfully, MPs from all three major Canadian political parties wrote a joint letter to support me, dismissing the campaign against me as being politically motivated and an effort to silence me. In the worst case, such attacks aim to intimidate and silence through threats of physical violence. I've experienced this on three separate occasions, once in 2008, once in 2019, and in May of this year. In 2019, I received a series of emails from a Moscow-based IP that included threats of violence. Then, as I did in 2008, I called the RCMP to report these threats. They referred me to my local police. When I called the local police, they told me to report the threat to the RCMP. When I called the RCMP again, they told me to try CSIS. My concerns were never properly addressed. Last May, I published an opinion piece that questioned the Kremlin's manipulation of history. My piece triggered a response by the largest pro-Kremlin daily newspaper in Russia, Komsomolskaya Pravda, which unleashed a massive wave of trolling against me. Among the hundreds of posts and messages, one Facebook user sent a vicious stream of profanity, including threats of violence against me and my family, as well as death threats. I decided to simply register the threats with the RCMP, but received the same sort of runaround. A few weeks later, I received more threats from the same account, asking whether I was dead yet, which prompted me to advocate for more action from the local York Region Police. Thankfully, perhaps just by chance, I was connected with a detective who took a meaningful interest in the case. After the messages were investigated for a month, I was told that York Region Police had tracked down the perpetrator. The police asked me if I wished to press charges. I declined, settling on a warning. I believe that this person has been radicalized by pro-Kremlin propaganda. I also believe it is the malign actors who promote foreign anti-Western propaganda who must be held to account, not the victims of it. It is very clear that the Canadian government is currently not taking this threat seriously. The foreign agents who intimidate Canadians and pollute our information environment do so with complete impunity. We must raise the cost of violating the rights and safety of Canadians. This includes the application of Magnitsky sanctions against all foreign officials and their proxies who seek to limit the freedom of expression of Canadians, a fundamental human right, according to Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Canada needs to develop a national reporting mechanism for victims of political intimidation. Telling Canadians to just, quote, report intimidation to police betrays a cynical insensitivity to their human rights. We should follow the US and Australian example and create a foreign agents registry for all former civil servants, diplomats, individuals, and groups who actively lobby any level of Canadian government on behalf of malign foreign states like China, Russia, and Iran. Finally, media literacy and foreign influence awareness training should be made mandatory for all Canadian civil servants, elected officials, and political staff. The All-Party National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliament has identified foreign interference as the greatest threat that Canada faces today. We need to address it now to defend our values, our citizens, and our society. I call on all parliamentarians to support this motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for setting this conference. My name is Javad Soleimani from Edmonton. I'm a student at University of Alberta. I lost my wife Elnaz Nabi in the downing of flight PS-75 by Iranian regime missiles. I never forget how Elnaz always told me that Canada is the best place for us to live, that Canada is a safe place for everyone. Honestly, now I doubt that due to what I have personally experienced over the past 10 months. I attended this conference today to emphasize that the Iranian regime is not a normal government, and that threats by the Iranian regime and its supporters in Canada must be taken more seriously. As you know, the International Branch of Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, (Quds), is recognized as a terrorist group in Canada. After Qasem Soleimani, the chief commander of Quds, was killed by the US, some supporters of the IRGC who reside in Canada easily and publicly gathered together and held vigils for the head of a terrorist organization. Please allow me to share with you a question that has been frequently asked among Iranian Canadian citizens. Does Canada tolerate public support of a terrorist organization? After burying my wife, I came back to Canada and started to speak openly about different aspects of the downing of Flight PS-75. someone, probably a permanent resident or perhaps a citizen of Canada, kept sending me messages telling me that IRGC is able to do anything in Canada and that I better be careful about myself. I've shared his identity with relevant authorities in Canada, hoping that he be removed from Canada. On March 5th, Hassan Rezaifar, the head of Iran's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, contacted me on Instagram audio call to talk about Flight PS75. He clearly threatened me to remove my Instagram post in which I had criticized the Iranian regime. When I refused to do so, Iran's intelligence service called my family. In April, a well-known judge in Iran told one of the victim families that they know about the association established in Canada by families of victims and that it's easy for them to make us silent and to suppress us even in Canada. This is clearly about the national security of Canada. I'll be happy to share the identity of this judge with you. Maybe one day he and his family want to move to Canada for the rest of their lives. You know, moving to Canada as permanent residents tend to be common among supporters of the Iranian regime. I hope this raises the important question of how IRGC authorities and their secret agents, all the way up to their judges, can feel this much confidence in threatening ordinary people pursuing justice in an established legal Canadian entity. On October 5th, the Association of Families of Flight PS752 had a nationwide justice rally in Canada. Top Canadian officials, Foreign Minister, the Special Advisor of Prime Minister, attended the rally and delivered strong speeches against the Iranian regime. During and after the rally, the website of our association was under heavy cyber attacks. It's not hard to guess who the attackers were. It's time to take targeted, impactful action against the threats done by the Iranian regime and its supporters in Canada. If Canada doesn't react proportionately, Canada wouldn't be a safe place for many Canadians. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. We'll now start the question period. As usual, one question, one follow-up. We'll start with 3 questions on the phone before turning to the room. Operator, could we also please identify yourself before asking your question? Operator, could we have the first question on the phone, please?
Thank you. Merci. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. The first question, la première question is from Mike Blanchfield, the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Yeah, hi, good morning to everybody, and thanks for coming together and telling your stories today. I have questions for all of you, but there's limited time, so I wanted to know if I can ask Mr. Soleimani, have you ever had any contact with Ralph Goodale, the special envoy for the government on the PS752 crash? He's a former public safety minister, as you know. Has he been talking to the families about this foreign interference? And can you talk more about that and shed light on that if you can?
Okay, thank you so much for your question. Yeah, we, families of victims, are cooperating with the Canadian government and Honorable Ralph Goodale, the Special Advisor of Prime Minister. And they are aware of what's happening. And I think they have been sensitive about the threats, but I think we expect more. We expect more action from the Canadian government. It's not at all acceptable that Iranian regime supporters, the supporters of a terrorist organization here in Canada, can easily kind of threaten families and actually spread hatred and violence inside the Canada. And it's not at all acceptable. Yeah, we are in cooperation with the Canadian government and relevant authorities in Canada, but honestly, we expect more. We expect more. Among Iranian Canadian community, let me tell you something. We don't feel safe here in Canada. One day, Canada was the safest place for all of us to live, but currently, it's not at all safe.
Well, I'd obviously like to ask you more, but I want to use my follow-up to perhaps ask one of the other participants, perhaps our Tibetan Canadian University student and the experience that you went through. What more does Canadian universities need to do to prevent this sort of thing? Because we've had, it seems to obviously be an issue. Could you elaborate on that and what you think the expectations are of publicly funded Canadian universities?
Ms. Lamo, if you could unmute your mic.
Okay, I thought I was off mute. I have a question for the Tibetan representative here today.
Sorry, Mr. Blanchet, you were off mute, but I don't think Ms. Lamo is. Did you hear the question?
Okay.
Hello, can you folks hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Thank you for the question. I think, first of all, it's really starting with reevaluating and reassessing the ties that we have in our universities and academic institutions with foreign governments. As of right now, Confucius Institutes are really present in many academic institutions, not just in universities. There was even in 2014, Toronto District School Board was about to get into a contract with the Confucius Institute. That meant that students as young as 3 years old from lower KG would have been brainwashed with material, academic material that the Chinese government is putting into Canadian soil. So because of the organizing that Falun Dafa organizations, Tibetan-related and human rights-related organizations came together, because of the protests and organizing that they did, the Toronto District School Board's trustees actually ended up voting against that. But that's just one victory. There's still so many Confucius Institutes present, and there's also organizations like CISA, the Chinese Students and Scholars Association, which under the guise of being a student campus-led group has not only strong ties to the Chinese embassy in the case that Pierre had absolutely proven, along with that there's much more data that can be presented across North America and Australia and the world. The Chinese embassy actually forces Chinese international students to be following the party lines. Imagine being an international student and coming to Canada, paying 4 to 5 times more than a domestic student to get an education, but being forced to go and protest whenever there is a Tibet-related event, having to go and follow other Tibetan students or Hong Kongers or anybody that speaks against the Chinese government when you should really be focusing on your education. So in terms of the action, first of all, providing safety for Canadian students. The one thing that I got from my university was a walkie-talkie. When the battery ran out, I went to go and get another walkie-talkie. So you let me know if you think that a walkie-talkie is going to keep you safe from death threats. And students who are actively, freely roaming around on campus, taking photos of people that I talk to, is that going to keep me safe? I think it's pretty self-evident. In regards to policies, I think this is where the government comes in. Having a motion like what MP Genuis has tabled today is a start. There's so many reports that human rights activists have come together to create for the Canadian government to look at, to read, and to implement, along with recommendations, which is why I referred to my statement earlier, the page 51. That's just one of the reports that has been created by the Canadian Coalition of Human Rights in China with Amnesty International. And so I think that's a start. And then ultimately just prioritizing Canadians who have gone through this experience of harassment and intimidation. Thank you, Check.
Thank you, Ms. Lamo. Operator, next question.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question, the next question is from Stephen Chase, Globe and Mail. Please go ahead. The line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Yes, thanks for taking our questions. I just wanted to, you came up with a lot of suggestions. I wanted to ask any of the speakers, what can you name one thing that you would have liked to see offered by the Canadian government to help you? Would it perhaps be the sort of, 1-800 line or something, or is there something that you could have used in terms of the tool that you didn't have when you were going through this?
Ms. Chimmy, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chase, for the question. I also appreciate your coverage on much of the harassment that folks have been going through in Canada. So in regards to your question, definitely. One thing that we've also mentioned in the recommendations in the report is having a centralized focal point where folks that go through this experience can go to report. Like Marcus had mentioned in his statement, I had very similar experience. I jumped from Toronto police to my campus police to RCMP to dealing with CSIS, dealing different levels of security or heads of security across the country, even coming to Parliament Hill and having a chat with MP Genuis, right? And ultimately, I still do not have a physical piece of paper that says, here's a report that we did, or here is the information on the people that have been threatening to kill you on Canadian soil. So I think one good start is to really have a focal point where we can go to, because it's not happening to just me. Clearly it's been happening to a lot of people, and these are just personalized attacks, but organizations that are human rights oriented have been facing this since they've existed. And so I think start would be having a focal point where that can happen. Two is having independent investigations taking place about the source of it, because solving it and giving band-aid solutions is not going to help. We have to get to the root of this. Why is this happening? Foreign influences are gaining a lot of power and influence within our institutions because of X, Y, and Z reasons. And what are they? And let's get to them. Cheers.
Mr. Kolga.
If I could just add that I think that the government right now is, first of all, is not taking the problem seriously. They've sort of brushed aside foreign interference into the Privy Council's office and Heritage, which is, I know that there are efforts that are being taken there to address the problem, but this is a public safety problem, and it's one of national security. And we need to shift the focus over there to start protecting Canadians rather than just, gently addressing the program. This is a serious threat. As like I mentioned, the National Security and Intelligence Committee last March stated that the threat of foreign interference is the greatest threat that Canadian democracy and society faces today, and we need to take it seriously. And that includes, as Kemi had mentioned, that we need to have a mechanism in place, and this could be an office that could process these threats and monitor them and help the victims of them. Because right now there's no place for any of us to go. It's unrealistic to expect local authorities to understand what a Chinese intimidation attack looks like or what information warfare looks like. They're just not equipped to do that. And so something on the federal level, or some organization, or at least a group that addresses this is critically essential. And so I'm glad that your motion is addressing this.
Just Stephen Chase here again. My follow-up question to any of the speakers would be, have other liberal democracies come up with a better way of handling this?
Sorry, I can't hear. I just would like to add something to the question that I totally agree with Shami and Marcus. And I would like to add something about what Uyghur Canadians experiencing in Canada, what kind of threat they are experiencing. Mostly the threat comes from China, because they hostage their families, and the Chinese police make a video call threatening their family. Police together with their family talk with the Uyghur students here, Uyghur family members here. So they're afraid they can't tell the Canadian police even. They threaten them, if you tell the Canadian police, if you do something, your mother gonna die, your father going to be arrested. So it is very difficult for Uyghurs trust each other even. They can't tell me or tell anybody that their family was threatened in China, and they were threatened here. They threatened that you're not going to participate in any organization, you're going to stay away from Uyghur community, you're not going to talk with anybody, or you're going to work for us as an informant. So they cannot trust each other, and they can't tell anybody. So I think it's if Canadian government establish hotline, I think it will be better. So these people can call the hotline, because they cannot trust to anybody, cannot tell anybody. That hotline gonna works, and the Canadian government open counter-interference office and work with the hotline, collect information, expose the China's interference, and then not down the China's interference. I think it's a better idea.
Do any of you want to address the follow-up about other countries that provide examples?
Mr. Kolga, go ahead.
Just briefly, I think there are other countries that have addressed this. The question is raising the cost to these individuals, organizations, and proxy groups that are engaging in these sorts of tactics, raising the cost. So that, if you look at the U.S., they have a foreign agents registry. Australia has a foreign agents registry, and there's a cost to those that engage in this sort of activity. There's also Magnitsky sanctions, as I mentioned in my opening remarks. In the U.S., at least in the Russian context, they've applied these sanctions to those individuals and organizations, some of them at least, that are engaging in information warfare and intimidation campaigns in the United States. Right now, and in China as well, they've applied those sanctions. But we're not doing anything in Canada. There is no cost involved. These governments and their proxies can operate in this country without any sort of cost to them and zero accountability. And this is the first thing that we need to change.
I just want to talk about some points. I think, yeah, as Marcus said, there's I think confusion. Sometimes actually they want to ask us to call RCMP and then CSIS, and then we are between RCMP and CSIS. There is not actually central office to actually process, to conduct investigation about threats. This is very important. And also regarding the Iranian regime, unfortunately, Iranian regime supporters or even Iranian officials who probably have been involved in violation of basic human rights in Iran can easily travel to Canada and be permanent resident. And this is getting actually common among Iranian officials. It must be stopped. Not at all acceptable. People have been involved in violation of human rights can easily come here and sometimes becoming actually a citizen in Canada. It's not at all acceptable. And I just want to emphasize on the Magnitsky Act. I think implementing the Magnitsky Act is a must. It's a must that actually give the Canadian government authorities to impose travel bans, asset freeze on those officials have been involved in the violation of human rights. I think we need to implement this act in Canada as soon as possible.
Just to quickly add on that, legislations to counter covert Chinese government interferences have actually been implemented in Australia and US, like mentioned earlier, from Magnitsky's Act. But we've even gone further in at least looking, you don't have to look too further away. The neighbor US has actually gone far enough to passing the Tibet Policy Act. And not just that, we have the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act. So you can look into that. Cheers.
Thank you. Operator, we'll move on to the next question on the phone.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question, the next question is from Lemon Zhao from the New Tang Dynasty TV. Please go ahead. Your line is open. Votre ligne est ouverte.
Hi. Yeah, my question is, I understand for the Chinese intimidation from the Chinese students, the students are usually the actors who go out to attack. But ultimately, it was the Chinese consulate. I recall 10 years ago there was a case that when Hu Jintao, the former Chinese leader, was visiting, the Chinese consulate held a student meeting and a tape was leaked. They were calling on the students to go out in large number to fight the Falun Gong, the Tibetan, the Uyghur, who are protesting human rights in China. And if I recall at that time, there was more than 10 civil organizations calling on the Canadian government to expel that Council for Education who hold this meeting to mobilize. But doesn't seem anything have happened. So I'd like to ask MP Genuis, Yeah, so like those are the root cause of the problem, like the foreign embassy consulate, like the Chinese consulate, who was actually instigated. So what should happen? Do you think your motion covered aspect to the handling of the people who are behind instigating this kind of activities?
Thank you for your question. So the motion that I put forward builds on a motion that was passed last week. And I think the motion last week in particular would speak to this issue in terms of the government needing to develop a plan to respond to all of the sources of foreign state interference. My Liberal colleague, John McKay, who was one of a small number of Liberal MPs who voted in favor of that Conservative motion, he gave an excellent speech in the House where he identified, he actually spoke about Ms. Lamo's case. He also identified the very large number of Chinese diplomats who are here in Canada, many of whom are operating in Toronto, and raised, I think, very serious questions about what kinds of activities they're up to. Canada must be prepared to expel diplomats in cases where those diplomats are involved in foreign interference and intimidation of Canadians. There's no doubt about that. There's an issue here. It's been identified by MPs across party lines, but it comes down to the government actually investigating and acting in cases where a response involving diplomats is appropriate.
Thank you. Is there a follow-up question?
Yeah, a follow-up question. The other thing is, even there is a line, a phone number, people who are harassed, who are intimidated can call. So, what it's maybe some of it's meet the code of threshold for a criminal charge, but a lot of them was just abusive languages. So, what is do you see that a phone number will just be effective, or if there's any other measures that should be involved in dealing with it?
I'll just say, I mean, I think that our speakers have all mentioned a variety of different tools. The central point of contact is where it starts, not where it ends. It's not good enough to just be able to call someone and talk about it and thank you very much, we're done now. But if you don't even have an initial point of contact, if where you go in the first place to tell your story isn't even clear, that's clearly a big problem. So we need to fix that first point of contact issue, and then we also need to add on all of the other pieces that our speakers have spoken about today, which are about what happens after that point of contact.
And just to add on it, having to ask folks that have gone through intense harassment, intimidation, and death threats to constantly repeat their stories is actually triggering and traumatizing. And as a neuroscience and psychology student, there is a lot of proof that that is not actually helpful. Cheers.
Thank you. We'll now take questions in the room.
Hi, David Thurton, CBC News. So, Mr. Genuis, we've heard a lot from the four speakers who are joining us today. So just kind of connect what they've been saying and the concerns that they've been raising, and how what you're presenting, what you're going to be presenting, will address that. If you could just kind of wrap that up for us and connect what they've been saying to what you hope your bill will achieve.
Thank you, and I think it's important for me today not to try to create unrealistic expectations that Motion 55 is the solution. Motion 55 it's a parliamentary motion. It's not a bill. It's a motion, just like our opposition motion last week. And it's us in the opposition using the tools that we have to put a vitally important issue on the agenda and to call for the government to act. The government, with the tools and resources that are at its disposal, has to develop a plan to respond to this pressing problem. And we've heard many great suggestions today for specific action that the government can take. So supporting this motion would be a step to indicating a recognition of the problem and the need for a solution, the need for new meaningful supports in place for people who are victims of foreign interference, the need for a national plan to respond to foreign interference that includes collaboration with and training for people at other levels of government. These are things that we need to put onto the public agenda and that the government needs to act on. In the opposition, the tools we have are relatively limited. Remember, we're not even able to propose private members' bills that spend money. Even if we were to put forward legislation, the parliamentary rules require that it's only government bills that actually spend money. So we need leadership from the government on this, leadership that I think has up till this point been lacking, but we are pushing and hopeful about getting that leadership to happen going forward.
This is a totally different question, and it's for you, Ms. Genuis, and also the 4 people who are joining us on the phone. Why do you think that it seems or it appears that foreign interference has increased lately? What do you attribute this to?
Well, so I think some of this reflects the politics of the states involved. That some of the examples of the states that we've talked about today are choosing to take a more aggressive posture in the world in general. I think that's especially the case with the government of China. So that's one of the trends that we're seeing. I think technology is obviously a part of it as well. The monitoring, the communication, the way in which technology enables the kinds of threats that are being made, as I think part of the picture as well. And this is just an emerging issue that maybe it's been there before, it hasn't been properly identified and recognized. But I think there is an increase in this threat, and as I think Mr. Paul-Hus talked about, I think this is the primary national security threat to Canada. Its efforts to intimidate and direct Canada by state actors working not in a direct way, but in a surreptitious way. So it's a reality that we need to be prepared to respond and adapt to quickly in order to keep our country safe. If there's other comments on this from,
I think it's really the geopolitics in an international state. We need to reassess our economic and trade ties. We need to look at our government and see where we put our human rights values and how much we actually value calling ourselves champions of human rights. And it really starts from home, right? And from my experience at academic institutions, foreign influences or Chinese government, for example, has been gaining a lot of influence and power because of their funding. They've been using their Confucius Institutes and their CISAs to put funding into the schools. And then once they have put a lot of funding, they start taking charge of events such as International Students' Day. And recently, not just recently, apologies, it started back in 2012, I believe, at Brock University, where a Tibetan student was not allowed to bring her Tibetan flag to the International Student Festival because the Confucius Institute was actually the main funder of this festival. So now we have main events on campuses, universities that are, prestigious universities at Canada that are being literally guided and funded and led by the Chinese government. Check.
Thank you. If there aren't any other responses, Mr. Kolga, go ahead.
Just briefly, we're seeing an increase in these sorts of tactics because they're cheap. It costs very little to engage in digital interference this way, to threaten people, to promote false information, disinformation. We saw what happened in 2016 in the United States and what's sort of escalated since then, this polarization that's happened in that country on a much higher level. The GRU, the Russian government, was able to help promote that sort of polarization for the cost of less than a Russian battle tank. Why wouldn't you engage in this sort of activity if the cost is so low? And the impact is a pretty serious destabilization of our democracy. And this is what these states are trying to do. They're trying to destabilize our democracies by polarizing us. So if there's no cost to it, to them, why not continue engaging in it?
I just had one more follow-up to your question. 'Cause I think it's an important question. You know, what's happening in the world now, and what's driving this? I think one thing we need to notice is how some of these authoritarian states learn from each other as well. There's different actors with different agendas, but also when one starts to break ground and behave in a particular way, there is an imitation or a learning that happens. And on the other side of it, we need to also be learning from our allies in terms of how to respond to it. So just as the governments of China, Russia, and Iran are starting to pursue similar tactics in certain respects, we can be pushing back by learning from the United States, the UK in terms of the response. And the other issue that I think we need to be wise to is the way that authoritarian states are trying to co-opt the language of social justice and anti-oppression. And this is very insidious and something that we need to call out when it happens. That very often legitimate criticisms of foreign state actors who are interfering in Canada and intimidating Canadians, any criticism of that is portrayed as somehow racist. And you know, we need to recognize that very often it's new Canadians who are victims of foreign state interference. Those of us who are calling out and responding to this problem, we are on the side of social justice. We are defending vulnerable people against oppression. So I think that's important to keep in mind. Yeah.
I don't know if you understand French, so okay. Je parle en français, donc aujourd'hui aussi, ce qui est important de retenir, c'est que la motion qui est présentée par mon collègue Garnett amène des faits et on ne fait pas de la spéculation. Actuellement, ce qu'on demande, c'est tout simplement basé sur des faits qui sont connus. Donc, le rapport, premièrement, le rapport des parlementaires sur la sécurité nationale, qui met clairement en cause l'interférence étrangère. Et ce rapport-là est public. Donc, c'est ce qu'on peut savoir. Il y a beaucoup d'informations qui n'est pas divulguées parce que c'est top secret. Mais il faut comprendre qu'ici, il y a déjà des lignes dans le rapport qui confirment l'interférence et qu'il y a beaucoup d'autres choses qui sont connues, premièrement. Deuxièmement, je vous référais au commentaire du ministre des Affaires étrangères, M. Champagne, lundi soir au comité Canada-Chine, dont Garnett et moi faisons partie. Dans ses propos d'ouverture, M. Champagne a clairement déclaré que la Chine de 2020 n'était pas la Chine de 2015, n'était pas la Chine de 2018, que la Chine de 2020 était un problème pour la sécurité. Et avait également, M. Champagne a également mentionné qu'il fallait avoir les yeux ouverts. Donc, le ministre des Affaires étrangères a confirmé dans ses propos d'ouverture que la Chine d'aujourd'hui n'était pas la Chine d'hier et que les rapports de sécurité nationale du Canada confirment les activités d'ingérence. Et c'est pour ça que je crois que la motion doit être approuvée par tous les parlementaires, par le gouvernement et par les députés libéraux de tous les partis, parce que on n'est pas dans des éléments de spéculation. On a 4 témoins aujourd'hui qui amènent des arguments, mais on a également des rapports de sécurité nationale qui confirment ce que nos témoins nous ont dit aujourd'hui. Donc, c'est pour ça que je m'attends d'avoir un support unanime de la Chambre des communes là-dessus. Et si jamais ce n'est pas le cas, on aura de sérieuses questions à adresser au premier ministre. Merci.
Thank you. And sorry, was there any other response? Yeah, Ms. Lamo, go ahead, a brief response, please.
Yep. Just in addition to what MP Genuis was talking about in regards to the tactics that are being used, there has been a shift, right, from hard power to now soft power, and China is basically using their sharp power through initiatives like cultural programs. In 2018, actually, there was a fake Tibetan organization that was created and launched in Canada, where actually we had parliamentarians present. And not only did that happen, there was a fake letter that was forged by the Prime Minister's office and the former Immigration Minister, Ahmed Hussein. And so in regards to the follow-up of that, where is it? Check.
Okay, thank you. I don't believe we have any additional responses, and I think that's the last question in the room as well. So this concludes the press conference. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, folks. Cheers.